A fake HOA cop just pulled a gun on my 78-year-old grandfather, then panicked when 12 FBI agents surrounded his lawn. This isn't a movie. It's what happens when a power-hungry Karen steals water from a Korean War vet's private well, and I weaponized her own plumbing to destroy her illegal rose garden. But the sewage revenge was just the start. By sundown, federal agents were digging up her backyard and her darkest secrets. My name's Sam, and I never imagined my quiet home would become ground zero for a neighborhood dictatorship. Before all this, I was just a grad school burnout crashing at my late mom's place, trying to help care for my grandfather while I figured out my next move. Grandpa, Mr. Kim to the neighbors, served in the Korean War. People say he's stoic because he doesn't talk much, but they don't see what I see. A man who'd do anything to keep his promise to Grandma to protect our family and the garden they built together. It was the last thing they planted before cancer took her. Whenever he waters those lilies, you can almost feel her presence. He's got a hand tremor these days, not from fear, but from the Parkinson's he keeps under wraps. And if you told him a self-appointed HOA enforcer would one day pull a gun on him, he'd have laughed. Yet here we are. Everything started innocently enough. One day, a woman we call Karen showed up on our doorstep with a forced smile and a clipboard so big you'd think it was a royal decree. She had that signature haircut, the kind that practically screams, "I want to speak to your manager." She introduced herself as the neighborhood's new Standards Committee president, which was strange considering we didn't have a committee, much less a homeowners association. Karen insisted it existed, in spirit, and tried to hand us flyers filled with rules about mailbox height, trash can placement, paint colors, and visual cohesion. Grandpa just thanked her politely. He'd survived Chosin Reservoir. A clipboard wasn't about to scare him. But Karen wasn't operating alone. She had a sidekick named Ken, her new boyfriend, a middle-aged man with an inflated sense of authority, sporting camouflage cargo shorts and a knockoff vest emblazoned with the word security. He strutted around like he'd watched every episode of some SWAT reality show on loop. The first time I met Ken, he marched right up to me while I was trimming hedges and demanded, "Do you have a permit for that tool?" I thought he was joking. He pointed to the hedge clippers in my hand and started quoting regulations from some imaginary bylaw. I laughed out loud, which only made him double down. He had the swagger of someone desperate to matter in a place that never asked for his help. That was just the warning shot. Karen began papering the neighborhood with notices about everything from excessive patriotism to non-compliant flower colors. One letter informed us that Grandpa's small American flag and his flower bed could trigger international tensions. Another complained about the mild hiss from our sprinkler, calling it a persistent sonic disturbance. Karen typed these ridiculous warnings in big, bold fonts, sometimes in Comic Sans, with lines like, "Only pastel furniture is permitted for a sense of communal harmony." We tried ignoring them. Grandpa was a war vet with a gentle soul. He believed that if you just let people like Karen burn themselves out, they'd eventually quit. Unfortunately, she had other plans. When Grandpa's tomatoes started wilting, we discovered Karen's masterpiece. She and Ken had rerouted underground pipes from multiple properties, including ours, to power her newly planted rose maze. She called it her Zen Zone, some labyrinth of high-maintenance blooms she watered obsessively. She tapped into our private well, the one Grandpa and Grandma installed decades ago, to feed that ridiculous garden. And she didn't ask permission. She just helped herself, as if our well was community property. Grandpa was furious, but he tried to stay calm. He'd say things like, "I've seen real enemies. This is just some busybody with a shovel." Yet I could tell it cut deep. That well and the lilies were part of his memories of Grandma. The fact that someone would sneak around, messing with it for personal gain, felt like a violation of everything he held dear. Seeing him so rattled ignited something in me. Maybe it was pettiness. Maybe it was righteous indignation. Either way, I decided to act. I started documenting everything: photos, videos, times, dates. I took shots of Karen's so-called HOA bulletins, the bogus citation notices, all of it. I wasn't sure what I'd do with the evidence yet, but I had a hunch it would come in handy. Then I figured out a way to take control of the community irrigation system Karen installed on our property. Her setup was floppy, with a backflow preventer stuck in place by cheap plastic piping. I rigged a secondary tank of old dishwater, laundry rinse, and a bit of our septic runoff. Instead of drawing fresh water from our well, her line would suck in that rancid brew. I called this my community compost tea. The minute Karen turned on her fancy hoses, she'd be unwittingly pumping foul sludge into her pristine rose maze. It worked like magic. Within days, her roses started browning, and she couldn't figure out why. Every time she stormed around sniffing for foul play, I just shrugged. She complained the air might be contaminated by local barbecues or passing trucks. Meanwhile, I kept funneling more of that glorious sludge into the pipeline. Ken would walk by our place, scowling like he could smell sabotage. But even with all his posturing, he never spotted the tank. It was concealed behind a couple of old boards in the shed. Things escalated when Ken caught Grandpa watering his lilies one afternoon. Grandpa's hand tremor was especially bad that day, and he clutched the hose in a slightly unsteady grip. Ken bellowed, "Step away from the water source," like Grandpa was brandishing a flamethrower instead of a garden hose. I was about to intervene when Ken suddenly pulled a pistol. It was the last straw. My mom ran outside, screaming, and I ducked behind our mailbox, phone in hand, filming every second. That's when I texted my uncle, who works in the FBI's counterterrorism division. He'd been keeping tabs on the weirdness for a while, ever since Thanksgiving when I joked about a HOA cult. Now, it was no longer a joke. Within minutes, 2 black SUVs roared into the neighborhood. Ken froze like a deer in headlights, pistol shaking in his grip. Grandpa stood there, refusing to drop the hose, his face calm but clearly unsettled. You could see the slightest tremble in his free hand, the one he'd always try to hide so no one would worry. The FBI agents swarmed the yard, guns drawn. Karen came rushing out in full meltdown mode, shrieking about how none of this was necessary. But her meltdown only got worse when one agent turned to her and said, "Ma'am, you're under investigation too." I thought this fiasco would end the moment Ken and Karen were handcuffed. After all, she was the self-appointed dictator behind the fake HOA, and he was the self-styled security nut. But it turned out the feds had been quietly gathering evidence of something bigger. Karen's HOA fees weren't just petty cash. She'd been collecting thousands of dollars from elderly neighbors under threats of liens and lawsuits. Worse, some of those funds had vanished into strange accounts that raised red flags with the IRS. My uncle never gave me all the details, but the words tax evasion and wire fraud were tossed around. Evidently, Karen wasn't just draining wells, she'd been siphoning people's retirement checks, too. After Ken was hauled away, sulking in the back of a federal vehicle, the FBI started combing Karen's yard. They took soil samples, examined the labyrinth of hacked-together pipes, and photographed the chaos she and Ken had created. The rose maze was half dead by then, wilting from the noxious water I'd redirected. Karen screamed at anyone who would listen, claiming they'd violated her Zen sanctuary. Nobody sympathized with her. Not after they saw how she bullied seniors into coughing up money for a non-existent HOA. As they led her away for further questioning, I felt a twisted sense of victory. After all, if you steal a veteran's water and harass an entire neighborhood, you're bound to lose eventually. Grandpa, though, was shaken. Not by the gun or the FBI presence, he'd seen worse in the war. What got him was the brazenness of it all. He sat on the porch that evening, sipping sweet tea like someone who'd just watched his own sense of community shatter. He mumbled, "All that noise over a hose. Your grandma would have told her to find a better hobby." I posted a video recap of the whole saga online. I'd been filming bits and pieces, Ken's bizarre citations, Karen's meltdown, the moment the FBI showed up. I titled the video Karen's Cult, How Fake HOA Declared War on a Garden Hose, and added sarcastic captions to highlight the absurdity. It spread faster than I expected, getting tens of thousands of views overnight, then hundreds of thousands. News outlets called. People messaged me to say they'd faced similar HOA nightmares. One woman said her HOA tried to confiscate her kid's swing set for unauthorized recreational equipment. Grandpa's stoic one-liner, "I just wanted to water my lilies," went viral, turning him into an unlikely folk hero. He refused all interviews, though, said the only spotlight he wanted was the sun on his flowers. That should have been the end. Ken was arrested for brandishing a stolen firearm, impersonating an officer, and elder harassment. Karen faced a slew of fraud charges. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. Then the letter arrived. It was handwritten on fancy stationery with an embossed crest that looked like clip art, an eagle holding a rake. It read, "You've embarrassed the wrong people. This isn't over. The board." The board? That name made me laugh out loud the first time I saw it. As far as we knew, Karen was the entire board. Who else was part of her imaginary empire? Grandpa just shook his head and mumbled, "Some people never learn." But the more I thought about it, the more it bugged me. I'd seen how brazen Ken was, how convincing Karen had been. Maybe there was another ringleader lurking in the shadows, someone who preferred to let Karen do the dirty work. And they just decided to declare war on me, the meddling grandkid who posted everything online. I pinned the letter to the fridge, like a trophy of stupidity, then went around the neighborhood, quietly digging for answers. Word travels fast in a retirement community. Mrs. Alvarez mentioned a stranger knocking on doors, claiming he had federal connections. Mr. Lin, who lived near the entrance, said some guy had offered to help fill the leadership vacuum left by Karen. The man's name was Craig Donaldson. He wore a polo embroidered with the letters NCC, claiming it stood for Neighborhood Compliance Council. He told people he was the rightful heir to the community standards. I got hold of some doorbell footage. Sure enough, there was Craig, mid-40s, receding hairline, that same smug expression Ken wore, clutching a clipboard like it was the key to a kingdom. He insisted the neighborhood needed a new wave of discipline. The difference was that Craig promised to do it legally, spinning lines about how Karen's dream wasn't misguided, just poorly executed. He claimed to have a better system for collecting dues and enforcing rules. Yet from what neighbors told me, it sounded like the same scam, only repackaged with fewer glaring typos. I was determined not to let Craig morph our peaceful streets into an HOA dictatorship 2.0. I texted my uncle again, gave him a heads up about this Neighborhood Compliance Council, and provided the new letter as proof of ongoing harassment. He asked me if I wanted an immediate confrontation. I told him I'd rather gather evidence first. If we pulled the trigger too soon, Craig might slip away like Karen almost did. My uncle agreed to keep the official eyes on standby, so we'd have what we needed if Craig made a serious move. That move came one night when Grandpa went outside to turn on the garden lights. Sparks flew. The circuit had been tampered with, someone fiddled with the wiring, probably hoping to scare us or force us to replace the setup. The electrician said it was a small miracle the entire line hadn't burst into flames. Grandpa's hands shook more than usual when he realized how close we'd come to a real disaster. Stealing water is one thing. Setting up a potential fire hazard is another. That's when I installed a battery of cameras and motion sensors all around the property. Grandpa insisted on helping, even though he had to steady himself against the railing while he drilled in a few of the mounts. He said, "I've survived ambushes before. One more won't break me." For days later, those cameras paid off. At around 2 in the morning, they caught Craig sneaking into our backyard. He had a flashlight, a measuring tape, and a camera phone, apparently photographing our fence line. Maybe he was planning to cite us for fence height noncompliance or something equally absurd. The footage was crystal clear. He hopped the fence, crouched by Grandpa's lilies, took pictures of the piping around the well, and muttered to himself about documenting the violation. I couldn't believe the nerve of this guy, trespassing in the exact place where Ken had threatened Grandpa at gunpoint. It was like these people had a compulsion to test the limits of the law. That was enough for me. The next morning, I handed everything, letters, footage, statements from neighbors, to my uncle. He told me to sit tight. Within a couple of days, 2 unmarked federal vehicles rolled up to Craig's house. The agents were calm, polite, professional. They knocked on the door, served him a notice of investigation for harassment, attempted fraud, and impersonating a municipal officer. Craig tried to pull the "I have free speech rights" card. The lead agent shot back, "This isn't about speech, sir. This is about you lying to seniors and collecting unauthorized fees. That's wire fraud." I watched from across the street with Grandpa, who silently sipped his tea. The porch creaked under his chair. "After a moment," he said, "takes a special kind of fool to pick up a cursed crown." He was right. Karen's phony empire was that cursed crown, and Craig decided to claim it. But he hadn't counted on a quiet Korean war vet and his petty grandson. He especially hadn't counted on the fact that we were connected to real federal resources, not some made-up federal connections. Even though Craig wasn't arrested on the spot, the investigation tanked his attempts to keep the NCC afloat. Word spread fast that the feds were onto him. Neighbors who'd been frightened started telling their stories. One man, Mr. Donnelly, admitted he'd given Karen and Craig hundreds of dollars in compliance fees because he was scared they'd put a lien on his home. Another neighbor, Mrs. Patel, said she repainted her entire house on their orders, only to discover the city had no record of any such requirement. The illusions of authority that Karen and Craig built collapsed like a soggy cardboard box. Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood started pushing back. People decorated their lawns with tacky pink flamingos, neon-colored garden gnomes, or giant patriotic banners, all to mock the so-called uniformity standards. Someone left a pink flamingo on Craig's lawn with a note reading, "Free bird," courtesy of the HOA survivors. Another family painted their fence in bright polka dots. Every time I walked the block, I saw new, gloriously ugly yard art. It was the best collective act of defiance I'd witnessed in a long time. Grandpa stayed mostly quiet, but I could see the relief in his eyes. No one was messing with his garden. His lilies were safe, and so was our well. The few times he spoke about it, he'd say, "I fought for freedoms bigger than flags and lawns." Hard to believe some folks use that freedom to bully others. Then he'd shake his head, dust the dirt off his hands, and go back to planting seeds. With Karen and Ken facing their charges and Craig under official scrutiny, the neighborhood finally settled. But it wasn't all quiet. I received a couple more anonymous letters, presumably from the so-called board. Each time, I posted them online, turning them into jokes. The board demands you take down that suspiciously bright wind chime. The board warns of consequences if you continue to show defiance with your porch decor. None of it stuck. The more they threatened, the more the neighborhood left. Without Karen's intimidation tactics or Ken's gun-waving bravado, the entire fake HOA collapsed under the weight of its own ridiculousness. That's when I got an unexpected visitor at my door, a young man holding an envelope. He said his father once lived in a community where a real HOA had abused its power, fining people for every minor infraction until they couldn't keep up. He'd seen my videos and recognized the same pattern. He drove hours just to hand Grandpa a letter thanking him for showing that even one voice can topple a bully's empire. Inside was a photo of the man's father standing proudly by a small garden, holding a little American flag. The back of the photo read, "Thanks for reminding me dignity doesn't have an expiration date." Grandpa looked at that picture for a long while. He had that distant expression he gets whenever he's remembering Grandma. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and said, "That's worth more than any medal." Then he invited the young man in for pie. I swear Grandpa never turns down a chance to feed someone. Maybe it's a generational thing, or maybe it's his own way of reminding people that kindness still exists in the world. In the following days, the local city council sent us a commendation, praising our thorough documentation and saying they'd use the footage to train municipal officers on spotting fraudulent HOAs. The neighborhood turned into a minor tourist curiosity, with folks driving by to see the garden that fought back. Some even left little painted rocks along our walkway, with messages like "Bloom in freedom" or "Hoses, not fear." Grandpa, never one for the spotlight, simply kept on watering the lilies. I decided to film a final mini-documentary to wrap things up. I called it, "How to Dethrone a Fake HOA Without Losing Your Mind." It showcased Karen's meltdown, Ken's phony security gear, Craig's creepy late-night trespassing, and ended with a shot of Grandpa patiently standing beside his beloved lilies. I added a brief voiceover. Sometimes you stand your ground because you refuse to let anyone trample your peace. Sometimes a garden hose can break a dictatorship if enough good people decide it matters. That video went viral, crossing 1 million views in a week. Social media was abuzz with stories from people who'd fought back against petty tyrants in their own neighborhoods. The best comments came from those who said they'd always felt powerless until they saw Grandpa quietly outlast 2 different bullies. The greatest victory was that more folks seemed willing to question questionable authority. Bullying thrives on silence. Once you shine a light on it, the whole facade tends to crumble. In time, Karen accepted a plea deal, admitting to fraud and paying steep fines. Ken got slapped with multiple charges for impersonating law enforcement and assault with a weapon, plus the stolen firearm charge. Craig faded into obscurity, rumored to have moved away after the feds built a strong case against him. Nobody missed them. The neighborhood snapped back to life, each lawn more colorful than the last. Nobody worried about some clipboard dictator scolding them for their flower choices or rummaging around their wells. As for Grandpa, he's still there every evening, watering his lilies. You can see the quiet pride in his eyes whenever someone new stops by to thank him. Sometimes they'll ask, "Were you scared?" He'll give that half smile and say, "I've been more scared facing bullies in cheap uniforms than facing real enemies." At least the real ones had the courage to admit who they were. Then he'll turn back to tending his blooms. That small act, nurturing life with just a hose and a gentle touch, feels more powerful than any phony badge or fake set of rules. But there's one last piece worth mentioning. About a week after Craig vanished, a city inspector came around to check the area for water safety. He confirmed that Karen's labyrinth of pipes had contaminated multiple yards, yet ours was somehow unaffected beyond that small dip in water pressure. When the inspector asked how we kept the well safe, Grandpa just said, "Good filtration and a watchful eye." I smiled, remembering the pungent sludge I'd unleashed on Karen's garden. I figure some secrets are best left in the compost heap of history. So that's our story. A tale of how a petty tyrant named Karen and her henchmen tried to rule a suburban block through forged documents and intimidation, only to be toppled by the very people they underestimated. They forgot that a community is more than just a bunch of houses. It's the spirit of the folks who live there, folks who can and will push back if you push them too far. It turns out you don't need an army to stand up for what's right. Sometimes, all you need is a garden hose, a phone camera, and a grandfather whose quiet dignity shines brighter than any so-called compliance council. People ask me sometimes, would you do it all again? The filming, the sabotage, the public showdown. I tell them yes, 1,000 times over. I did it for Grandpa, for the memory of Grandma, and for every neighbor who was too scared to speak up. Their relief, their renewed sense of freedom was worth the stress. And maybe in the grand scheme of things, it's a small victory. But I've learned that small victories can mean everything when they protect the ones you love. Today, the infamous rose maze is gone, replaced by a patch of weeds and a "for sale" sign. Karen apparently had to sell the property, and no one's in a hurry to buy it because the stigma of fake HOA house looms large. Meanwhile, across the street, Grandpa's lilies bloom more vibrantly than ever, like they're fed by all the triumph and laughter that came from defeating a petty tyrant. Neighbors pass by, wave at Grandpa, leave little tokens of thanks in the flower bed. He never wants anything in return, just a quick hello and maybe a kind word about the garden. If they ask him why he keeps at it, he'll say, "This garden is the last thing Grandma and I built together. As long as it blooms, she's still here." That's the heart of it. A quiet man, a memory he cherishes, and a patch of lilies that survived the nonsense of a fraudulent HOA. All the drama, the FBI cars, the arrests, and the viral fame fade in comparison to the simple act of nurturing life where it's needed. His love for that garden outlasted 2 pretenders to some imaginary throne. It outlasted the fear they tried to instill. And it continues to blossom season after season, reminding anyone who cares to look that real strength doesn't come from shouting or waving a gun. It comes from standing your ground, gently but firmly, for what truly matters. Maybe that's why, whenever I hear the soft hiss of Grandpa's hose, I think of freedom. Freedom from intimidation, from the ridiculous rules that bullies make up to feel powerful. A garden hose isn't just rubber and water. In the right hands, it's a symbol of persistence. A tool that fights rot, dryness, and yes, even dictatorship. Karen's meltdown showed how a single malicious person can twist a neighborhood if nobody stands up. But Grandpa's quiet defiance showed how easy it is to unravel that power once people say, no more. In the aftermath, a small group of neighbors started gathering each Sunday by Grandpa's porch with lemonade and folding chairs. They call it Liberty Hour. There's no president, no dues, no rules, just folks sharing stories about everything from military service to the best way to prune roses without stealing water. Kids draw on the sidewalk with chalk, scrawling pictures of gardens and hoses, and older residents reminisce about simpler times. Every so often, someone jokes about writing actual bylaws for the real HOA, but it's always met with laughter. They all know better now. An authentic community doesn't need a tyranny of signatures and stamps. Local media still checks in from time to time, asking if we've had any more run-ins with phony officials. We haven't. A few distant relatives of Karen left us snarky online comments, calling me a troublemaker who should have minded my own business, but they quieted down after the real legal paperwork came through, confirming Karen's wrongdoing. As for the viral videos, they mostly run their course, replaced by the next story about a cat that plays piano or a dog that skateboards. But every once in a while, I'll see a comment from someone who stumbled upon it. They'll say something like, "This gave me courage to confront my HOA," or "Thanks for proving bullies can be stopped." That never gets old. Grandpa, being who he is, never took credit. He attributes the victory to common sense and a sturdy backbone. But I know the truth. His unwavering resolve anchored me. Without that, I might have backed down, deleted the footage, and let Karen's oppression go unchallenged. If you ask me, Grandpa's quiet heroism was the real reason we won. I was just the messenger, the one who documented the madness and posted it for all to see. He was the man behind the hose, protecting something so simple yet so meaningful, his memories, his rights, and the dignity of neighbors who thought they were alone. At the end of it all, the feds wrapped up their case with a neat bow. Ken faces prison time for his gun crimes and impersonations. Karen's financial penalties will likely haunt her for years. Craig's Neighborhood Compliance Council disbanded before it could truly spread. A wave of relief washed over the community, and a sense of pride replaced the anxiety. Mr. Donnelly, who once cowered under the threat of fake liens, now places fresh flowers at Grandpa's fence every week, just as a gesture of gratitude. Mrs. Patel, who'd been forced to repaint her house, took it upon herself to cover her mailbox with bright polka dots. As for me, I still live here at least for now. Working remotely, helping Grandpa with chores, staying close because he's up in years and deserves some support. Every morning, we share a quiet cup of tea while the sun rises over the garden. He'll glance at the lilies and say something like, "They need a little more water today," and I'll nod. We don't talk much about the ordeal anymore. It feels like it happened in another lifetime. But there's no forgetting that day Ken pulled a gun on him, or that surge of relief I felt when the FBI swooped in. There's no forgetting Karen's final scream when she realized her empire was rotting from within, literally and figuratively. What resonates the most is how everyone came together in the end, even though most of them are older folks with plenty of their own worries. They could have stayed silent and let the bullies run the show. Instead, they chose to stand by Grandpa and me once they realized they had a choice. That's the essence of a real neighborhood, people uniting to defend each other when push comes to shove. Even the quiet ones can raise their voices when something precious is threatened. And so, life goes on. The mailbox is no longer filled with fake citations, just the occasional flyer about a local bake sale or a note from a neighbor. The only official meeting around here is Liberty Hour on Grandpa's porch, where the rules are simple. Bring yourself, maybe a folding chair, and a willingness to chat about anything except new regulations. Because we've had enough of those for a lifetime. Grandpa still waters his lilies every dusk. And if you listen close, that hose sounds a lot like freedom. It's a gentle rush that says nobody gets to steal your peace or claim ownership of your life. Not a fake HOA, not a wannabe security guard, not a neighborhood compliance council. Water is supposed to bring growth, sustenance, and renewal, not fear. So let it flow, let it nourish, and let it remind every petty dictator out there that their power is paper thin compared to the steadfast will of people who refuse to be bullied. In the end, that's our legacy. Not some dramatic final confrontation, but a simple daily ritual of watering lilies that symbolize resilience. Each new bloom says, we're still here. We didn't bow down. And for anyone who stumbles upon this story, I hope it sparks a bit of courage to stand up against small-minded bullies, because whether it's a fake HOA or something bigger, no one should have the right to steal your well, your garden, or your peace of mind. That's how you keep things blooming. That's how you make sure petty tyranny withers away, replaced by something far more beautiful and enduring, community grounded in mutual respect. One garden hose, one video, and one grandfather's unwavering devotion to what he loves most. That's all it took to topple a kingdom built on lies. So let it be a reminder. Never underestimate the power of a little water, a stubborn streak of justice, and a family determined to keep a promise made long ago in a garden that still stands, quietly refusing to yield to anyone who dares claim they can take it away.